So remember, no
It's finally here. It's no exaggeration to say that the wait for Tekken 8 has been monumental. It's by far the biggest gap we've had between major releases, and if you start counting with the arcade version, it has been nearly 10 years without a new Tekken game. Whether you're a longtime Tekken fan or someone who is only considering getting into the series, you likely have a lot of expectations built up by Tekken's legacy and years of anticipation. In this review, we'll give you as thorough of a look as we can at this game, and if it was worth the wait, or more importantly, if it's worth your money. We'll break it down into chapters, so if you only care about specific parts, you can check those out individually. Before we begin, please sub to the channel if you enjoy the video, and hit the bell to never miss a new upload, and a massive thank you to the kind souls who support us on Patreon. And now, let's dive into this. Let's be honest. Story was never truly at the forefront of Tekken. Even though it's one of the earliest, if not the first fighting game with CG movie endings, it was more of a fun reward for beating the arcade mode. It wasn't until Tekken 4 that they fleshed out the storyline quite a bit, and Tekken 6 was the first time we got an actual story mode. Nevertheless, it's hard not to feel invested in the storyline that has been going on for nearly 3 decades. Regardless of its many shortcomings. The lead up to Tekken 8 also made it obvious that we're in for something big here. A grand conclusion of the Mishima family feud. I went in with fairly low expectations, but it didn't take long until the story mode actually pulled me in. A big contributor is the fantastic opening that throws you right into the fight and does 2 great things at once. In terms of story, it establishes Kazuya as a truly intimidating villain. He is powerful, in control, and even despite Jin's own considerable strength, the fight is largely a one-sided beatdown. When the second strongest characters in the world are not enough, it creates some intrigue for what will happen next. The other great thing it does is establish that this is not going to be your average story mode gameplay where you do a series of generic CPU fights before going back to cutscenes. Instead, as the fight goes on, both Kazuya and Jin slowly push each other further, bringing out their devil powers, which naturally affects the moveset and flow of the fight. This is largely done with Jin, but even when you're not playing him, they still try to keep things fresh with constant boss fights and other gimmicks. The most notable deviation from the norm is in later chapters when you get to play Tekken 8's take on a long-time series mode, Tekken Force. Unfortunately, I don't have too many positive things to say about it. It adds a bit of variety, but the gameplay is a mess. We can't show you footage past the first 4 chapters, so just imagine Dynasty Warriors, but bad. You have large groups of enemies coming at you from every side, but your movement is locked to a 2D plane, and you have to rely on a terrible lock-on system to try and maneuver around them. All while they can easily stun lock, interrupt, and armor through your moves, or attack from a direction you can't physically block. Sounds fun, right? It's a shame, because I feel like if they simply used the Devil Within approach to controls, it would be a lot more enjoyable. And there are some cool mechanics in there, like the Witch Time that activates heat after a well-timed sidestep, or the Rage Burst that lets you restore some HP while knocking back every enemy around you. Fortunately, it's only a minor section of the game, and it gets a lot better from there, as the final chapters enter a massive boss battle that I will not spoil for you, because I think the less you know about it, the more fun it is. If you're planning on getting Tekken, try and avoid spoilers about it. Seriously. Unlike the gameplay, the story never hits any major humps, although it might come at the cost of not being awfully ambitious. Tekken 8 revolves around the staple of shonen manga storytelling. It's a hero's journey where both sides seek more power, but one does it to protect, while the other does it so to destroy and conquer. I love Tekken, so the bias could be clouding my eyes here, but all the tropes and cliches didn't impede my enjoyment of the many character interactions and callbacks to older titles. The whole journey feels like a love letter to Tekken. There are so many little touches here, from using the music from older games, to minuscule details like recreating the shots from past Tekken openings. By the time credits were rolling, I couldn't help but get a little emotional about seeing a resolution for a conflict that started before I was even born. It's unfortunate that new characters didn't play a bigger role in the story, but after you see the post-credits scene, it might explain why that was the case. Before moving on to talk about what kind of content is in the game, we first need to talk about what has changed with the game. It has been a somewhat contentious topic. Some people felt like it's just Tekken 7 2.0, while others said that the addition of heat and chip damage strays too far from the staples of Tekken. I'm in neither of those two camps, but I feel like if you go for the middle ground, it's an accurate impression of how Tekken 8 feels. It's definitely not different enough to say that it's nothing like 7, but this is also Tekken we're talking about. Outside of tag spin-offs, the streak from Tekken 2 to 4 was the only stretch of time when every new game felt like something drastically different. This series was always less about dramatic changes and more about refining what's there and trying to amplify it, which is what the heat system potentially does. Every single change contributes to the key word that we've heard so much: aggression. The universal nerf to Magic 4's no longer launching makes it easier to stay on offense without a risk of getting blown up. Arenas now include DOA style hazards that reward offense with extra combo potential. The presence of an armored heat burst for every round also means that every character has a solid panic button that can reverse the tides. Meanwhile, chip damage gives a two-way incentive of applying pressure and trying to get out of it. It will take quite a bit of time before we truly get to understand what kind of impact the new mechanics will have on the core principles of Tekken, but so far, I'm rather optimistic about it. I absolutely hate mechanics that pause the game to show off some animations, but that aside, heat does typically enhance the character identity while also making things more dynamic. The last thing to mention here is that Tekken 8 comes with an updated control system meant for beginners. Initially, I felt it was way too limiting, but after getting more familiar with it, it could definitely serve as a jumping on point for new players. It's not nearly as viable as Modern and Street Fighter 6, but as long as the player understands the basics of fighting game RPS, they can mash out a few wins against people around their skill level. So you're done with the story mode, but you don't quite want to hop into online play yet. What else is there for you to do in Tekken 8? Well, let's get the obvious out of the way first. Treasure Battle and Tekken Bowl didn't make it over, but your standard arcade and versus modes are still there. Character episodes also made their return, albeit now it's way more tedious as you need to go through 5 fights for every character to unlock your silly little cutscene. The missing modes are replaced by the new Arcade Quest, Super Ghost Battle, and the return of Tekken Ball. When it was first shown, many people drew a comparison between Arcade Quest and Street Fighter 6 World Tour, but they couldn't be more different. While World Tour is a sort of Yakuza at home, Arcade Quest is more like a very drawn-out tutorial mode that tries to present lessons in a more organic way. You can beat the whole thing in a matter of hours, assuming you actually bother to read the sleep-inducing dialogues and try to complete all the side objectives. As a new player onboarding, it's not too bad. You will definitely learn the bare basics and pick up enough info to go online and have at least some idea of what you're doing. However, as a whole, it exists in this gray area where it doesn't offer anything to veteran players, and it doesn't teach nearly enough to the newbies. You learn about things like armor moves, heat, punishment, but any remotely complex parts of Tekken are left out. This would have been fine if the game contained at least some sort of info for people who want to get into deeper things, but Arcade Quest is basically all you get, which means that Tekken 8 continues the streak of the series relying on community resources to foster new players. The aforementioned Ghost Battle does help here a little. By training your own Ghost, it becomes very easy to spot some of your own downfalls and mistakes, like failing to block low, sloppy movement, or lackluster combos. Meanwhile, the much better AI across the board goes a long way in making CPU fights significantly more engaging. They're not quite lifelike, but having AI that actually understands Tekken movement, pressure, and combos puts it far above anything I've seen in other fighting games, with only Killer Instinct's Shadow AI being comparable. Unfortunately, the Tekken Ball AI isn't nearly as sophisticated. It's extremely predictable, so matches quickly come down to going through the motions. Yet, we've all seen during Tekken World Tour how fun this mode can be when playing against another human. Oh well, at least there's a dedicated Tekken Ball area in every online lobby. Outside of gameplay modes, there are also some nice additions and improvements to staple features. Practice mode offers more options, replays allow you to immediately take control and put specific advice into practice, and customization shows signs of the Soul Calibur team applying their know-how to Tekken. The items fit onto characters infinitely better, and their quality is obviously higher, even when it comes to assets that were taken from Tekken 7 and updated. The customization itself is only slightly more modular since you can adjust the position, size, and angle of your accessories, and shoes have been separated into their own slot instead of being tied to your pants. Netplay was graced with some massive upgrades this time around. For starters, there's no question anymore if Tekken actually uses rollback. You will run into artifacts from time to time, and it's far from being the best implementation that I've seen, but it's the best we've got among 3D fighters, and I'll take occasional teleports if it means more responsive controls. If you don't feel the same way, the option menu has different rollback settings that, as far as I can tell, simply change the amount of input delay. Following in the footsteps of ASW and Capcom, Tekken now has an actual in-game lobby that many of you likely explored during the network betas. It's a charming little lounge with several different areas for online practice mode, customization, normal matches, and Tekken Ball. It's a nice option for those who want to get a more social experience out of their fighting games, but without daily missions and terrible matchmaking like in Street Fighter 6, I'm not sure if these lobbies will see as much use. Finally, the player rooms are now much better as well. They now allow up to a whopping 18 players, and you can separate into groups to get more matches going at the same time. Something we've all been asking for in Tekken 7. Those who just want to non-stop rematch can do it more efficiently as well, with a special toggle that locks the room to only 2 players. Unfortunately, it seems like tournament mode had to be sacrificed for these improvements to happen, and there's another general change that I know not everyone will love. Instead of having an infinite rematch option like in Tekken 7, your rank sets are locked to first to 3. This is fairly standard for any competitive format since rotating opponents prevents point farming, but it also means that we can no longer enjoy a good old ranked deathmatch. And finally, the last part of this review. This is where I get to gush about how damn good this game looks and sounds. I wouldn't say Tekken 7 is ugly by any means, but once you put some time into Tekken 8, it's almost impossible to go back to 7. Despite not using the breakthrough Unreal Engine 5 tech like Nanite and Lumen, it's a fantastic looking game that looks like it belongs on the current generation and performs remarkably well despite the sheer amount of detail on display. This could be a works on my machine moments, but I also haven't experienced any stutters during the playable sections, despite that being an issue during the network test. One of the mottos of the game's development was full power and destruction, and you can definitely feel it, especially with the awesome new stages. Your battlefields are a lot more reactive this time around, and I was surprised when I realized that some of the destruction and spectacle that I assumed was only done in the story mode is still there for regular matches. As you fight, everything around you is shaking, blowing up, breaking, falling. It's a feast for the eyes that Tekken 7 was sorely lacking outside of a few examples. The fantastic OST nicely ties it together. In my opinion, the soundtrack for Tekken 8 is not just better than Tekken 7, it has to be one of the best in the franchise. Those who prefer more orchestral or rock-inspired themes might be disappointed, but as someone who leans more towards electronic music, Tekken 8 rarely missed for me. And hey, if you don't like any specific track, they have a very flexible jukebox that has music from every prior Tekken title. So in conclusion, is Tekken 8 good? Is it worth your money? The answer to the first part of that question is simple. Tekken 8 is an excellent game. It's already in a good state, and it can only go up from here. So I'm genuinely excited to spend years with this title, the same way I did with Tekken 7. If they actually add Tekken Force as its own mode and fix the controls for it, I'd go as far as to say that this is the ultimate Tekken game and a potential peak for the franchise. However, when money gets involved, the question is more difficult. If you're a fan of the series, then sure, it's going to be worth it. But what about someone who only considers getting into Tekken and isn't sure that they will enjoy it? In that case, it might be more worth it to wait on a sale unless you have a lot of disposable income to throw around. The Tekken community is strong and dedicated, so even if you join just a few months late, you won't have to worry about player numbers or not having players around your skill level to play with. Thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. We hope you found it useful, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I will be checking them from time to time and try to answer any questions or concerns you might have about Tekken 8. And again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.